enrolled in school and I did extremely well. Graduated at the top of my class. Was encouraged to continue my education, so I pursued a bachelor's degree and graduated at the top of my class. One of the reasons why, and I tell folks this, is that I decided to pursue a bachelor's degree in public safety management with a concentration in criminal justice. And I chose that subject because I had a lot of experience getting arrested and appearing before judges and in and out of jails and prisons, thinking that that was going to help me in the classroom, and it did. I graduated with highest honors. And the next thing you know, I get accepted into law school. And in May of 2014, I walked across that stage and received my Juris Doctorate degree, right? And thank you so much. And let me tell you, yeah, sometimes I just pause there for a minute, just because I need people to know that, you know, in spite of obstacles we may face, that we can never say that something is impossible, right? That in spite of mistakes that we've made, right, we can't think that our worst mistake could define us for the rest of our lives and limit us to a certain station in life. And then, of course, also is that there's so many people out there in our community that are incarcerated, that are addicted to drugs, that are homeless, right? And so many times we tend to look at those individuals as pariahs, right? And people that's draining our resources and what's wrong with our society. But I'm a testament that we could really start to look at them and see what's possible, right? What is possible in our society. And so, I and I say this because what started to develop, especially after we passed Amendment 4 and I registered to vote for the first time since I was in high school, and that was over like 30 something years ago, right? And I remember voting in my very first presidential election in 2020. And let me tell you, I'm walking up to the voting location, and I'm realizing I'm walking on hollow ground, right? And then when I get in there and I get my ballot and I go into the booth and I start to select who I wanted to vote for, I realized that I was participating in a sacred act, right? That now, here's the thing, that transcended, right, partisan politics, that transcended implicit racial biases, right? It took me to a place that basically said two words. It says I am, right? That I understood that I was engaging in an act that was not political at all, but was an affirmation of my humanity and of my place in a society, that my voice, my existence mattered and could make a difference and was a key part of the universe, right? And that I realized, wow, this is not about, oh, like I wasn't voting as a Democrat or a Republican, or I wasn't voting as a man or a woman or whatever sexual identity I may have choose. I wasn't voting, as a black person or white person. I was voting as a human being. And it was in that process, right, that I'm going through all of this, then I realized something that was so transformative, right? First of all, I understood and realized, the true importance of voting, right? And it had less to do with politics than most people would think, right? And I understood, right, well, after that experience, I started understanding that the fight or the efforts that I was engaged in went beyond advocating for people with felony convictions, right? What I started to understand was, what came back to me, I should say, was this old adage, and you all have heard it: a chain is only as strong what as its weakest link. That even if you have a chain with 5 links, and 4 of those links could hold up to a ton of weight, and one of those links could only hold 100 pounds, how much weight will that chain be able to hold? 100 pounds, right? And even if you strengthen the other 4 links to where they can hold 4 tons of weight, that chain will still only be able to hold 100 pounds. And so, if we want that chain to hold more weight, to be stronger, then that means that we would have to strengthen that weakest link. And I believe that when we think about the chain being the strongest, weakest link, it also applies to our society, our communities, our country, our world, that we can only be as great as those who have been most weakened by various systems of oppression and racism and narratives that say that some lives are just not as valuable as others, right? And so understanding that during this process I was going through, I realized that the focus of my advocacy was not the person with a felony conviction, but was with on Chris and Fred and Jennifer and Todd and Mara. I was fighting so that each and every one of you could have a better world. So each and every one of you could be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of your political, religious views, regardless of your identity, your immigration status. All of that was irrelevant. What was most relevant was your humanity. I didn't realize, how deep that was. I mean, when we did Amendment 4, I purposely pushed our strategists to implement tactics that elevated the connectivity of our humanity, as opposed to something that was around race and something that was around partisan politics, right? I was very intentional in doing that, right? And I think that's how we was really able to, we organized people around love and around our connectivity as human beings, and that was able to withstand all of the negativity and was able to pass successfully. But going through this metamorphosis and understanding, right, that the times that I was fighting and I thought I was fighting for returning citizens, I was really fighting for you all, really took me to a whole new different level. And I understood that in order to do that, in order to create a better world for you all, then I had to concentrate on the returning citizen, because the returning citizen have been the most marginalized and just, I don't want to say mistreated, but just abused population that we have, right? That even, because think about it, you have a gentleman that maybe 30, 40 years ago, he made a mistake, and 40 years later, he still have to say, I'm an ex-felon. He still have to wear the scarlet letter of shame. No one is walking around saying, I'm an ex-liar, or I'm an ex-thief that didn't get caught, or whatever, pronouncing the worst thing that we've done in our lives for the rest of our lives. But people who have been impacted by the criminal justice system have to. We face barriers to democracy. Some places we're not allowed to vote, right? And we face barriers to economic mobility because of our arrest and sometimes even conviction. We can't live where we want. We can't get a good job. We can't get a decent education, right? And we're ostracized from our own community. And so I believe that the one group of people that have been most marginalized and been most weakened by various systems are returning citizens. And if we want a stronger community, then I have to put my energy into making sure that we're strengthening folks. And one of the main things that I do to strengthen them is, number one, try to fight to give them access to democracy. But in the process of doing that, you guys ready for this? Very simple. I remember when someone asked me who the enemy was going to be in our campaign, right? Because every good campaign needs an enemy, needs a villain. And I told them, no, we're not doing that, right? We win this campaign if voters can see the humanity in us. If they could see us as a human being, we win this campaign, right? And so when we fight for returning citizens, the underlying river that is flowing through all of my work is very simple. Get people to love who they despise the most. Just that simple. How we see the humanity in that person that we call a felon or that bad person, how could we see the humanity in them, and how could we connect with their humanity, and how could we love them? Because if we can learn to love those the least among us, then that means that we're capable of loving everyone. And when we're capable of loving everyone, that's when we can do great things in our society, in our communities, in our state, in our country. And this world becomes a much better place for everyone to live. It's just that simple. I know we talk about felon disenfranchisement, and I know that's the title of the topic, right? But I think that buried in there is about how are we treating each other as human beings. You see, when we look at the history of felon disenfranchisement, especially the recent history after during the Reconstruction era, after the emancipation of slaves, how felon disenfranchisement was part of the Jim Crow laws that was used to aggressively diminish the newfound political capital of the newly released slaves. How felon disenfranchisement was a way to criminalize, right, the newly freed slaves in such a way that allowed former slave owners to not to incarcerate them and lease them back out into the same field that they was just liberated from, but to also strip away, right, the right to vote, the right to run for office. Because what they seen happening after the Emancipation Proclamation was so many newly freed slaves were running for office and getting elected, right, and becoming commissioners or mayors and becoming congressmen. And that was a scary sight. And so felon disenfranchisement was one of those tools that was used. But they was able to do that because they were able to dehumanize. They were able to dehumanize those individuals. They were able to say, oh, they're criminals and they're felons. And we use some of the same terms today. And sometimes we even get a little bit more elaborate. We use terms as super predators and villains, and all in the effort of dehumanizing an individual. And when we're able to dehumanize people, then we're not as aggressive in making sure that their rights are protected and they're treated with dignity and respect. As long as they're, we see it in immigration. You put that word illegal right next to immigrant, and the next thing you know, it's a totally different approach that people are having, and it's a totally different level of empathy because of words, because of dehumanizing and desensitizing us to a person's humanity. And so we see this in our criminal justice system. As long as we can call them felons, and as long as we can say criminals and convicts, that no one is noticing how we're treating those individuals. That's why we can incarcerate children and place them in adult facilities and place them in conditions that we wouldn't even want our own pets to be in, and it would be okay, right? That's why we can charge children as adults, right? That's why we can hold human beings in solitary confinement, right? And subject them to this mental torture. And it's okay because they're not like us. There's something different. And so in this work of felon disenfranchisement, we were able to say that, hey, some people are not worthy of being part of democracy. Definitely not those criminals. And we get sometimes, like folks today, they're so focused on that, but I have to remind them that, hey, listen, Jennifer, it wasn't too long ago that women were in the same boat. That people were saying that, no, women should not have a say on how this country is ran, because they're different and they're not as good. They're not as deserving. And we were so intent on preventing women from voting that we were willing to attack them, brutally, physically attack women and throw them in prisons, all because they wanted to be a part of democracy. It's the same mindset. I have a select group of people who want to pick and choose who gets to vote, instead of understanding that every human being that lives in a society should have an opportunity to have their voice heard. We have to recognize their humanity. And so the work around felon disenfranchisement is not just the work around giving people who've been impacted by the justice system the right to vote or advocating for them to be a part of our democracy. No, the work in felon disenfranchisement is a much broader work that forces us to recognize the humanity, even in the least among us, the so-called least among us, and recognize the fact that every person should have a say, right, in how they live their lives. Every person should have a say on how their society is governed. And until we get that, there will always be some evil, there'll always be some disadvantage. Anyway, I know that you guys probably have a few questions for me. I want to stop there so we can get into some Q&A. But thank you so much once again for having me.
Well, thank you so much, Desmond, for joining us and taking the spotlight off of you. So I'm hearing some echoing going on. I'm not sure where that's coming from. I'm going to mute one person, and that seems to have fixed that. So please, if you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand, and you can do it physically or through the raise hand feature. I'm going to start off actually. I want to make one comment and one question. The comment is that, Desmond, we actually have a member of our society who was brought in to our society as an incarcerated person. He's been in prison for 40 years and will be released this February. We've had a long engagement period with him, about 2+ years. I've been the central person who's been doing that. But we look forward to his release and hope we can be a part of his success. Second, I was delighted when Florida passed Amendment 4, but then horrified by what the Republican legislature did after that in trying to say they have to pay all their existing fines before they can be. What's the status of that?
Great question. Great question. I man, I have a little analogy to share with that. I tell folks that, when I looked at Amendment 4, to me, what popped in the head was that we had a homeless family in our community that lived on the streets. And I mean, rain, sleet, or snow, they faced all these elements because they didn't have shelter for over, I think, over 75 years. They have not had a shelter. And politicians would walk past that family every day, not lift a hand. But we, the people, came together and said, no, we're going to build that family a home. And as soon as we built the home, the politicians came running back wanting to demand that they determine how to furnish the house. The audacity of the politician. That's what happened in Amendment 4. Like I said, Amendment 4, we won it because we elevated the campaign above politics and race. And we really showed the world that love could win the day. But after love won the day, guess what came back? The ugliness of politics came back. And next thing you know, once it was just back and forth. But the Florida legislature, they could not touch the Constitutional Amendment, because the only way you touch that is by having another Constitutional Amendment and have the people who voted for it actually turn around and vote against it. But what they could do was they could define some words within the Constitution. And the word that they defined was completion of sentence. Mm-hmm. And so according to the Florida legislature, completion of sentence meant that a person had to pay all legal financial obligations that was associated with its conviction before being able to enjoy the benefits of Amendment 4, before being able to register to vote. Well, what we did was, in 2020, we raised over $30 million. And we went through the entire state of Florida, and we found people who could not afford to pay their legal financial obligations. We felt that, that no person, no citizen should have to be forced to choose between putting food on their table or voting, between paying their rent or their mortgage or voting. No one should be forced that, right? That voting or access to the ballot should be free, right, and unencumbered, right? And there were over 90,000 people throughout the country that also believe that, and they donated to our campaign. And so we raised $30 million, then we paid it out. But $30 million was just a drop in the bucket, to be totally honest with you. You're talking about probably billions of dollars that people are owing to our court system. And so, but we had another avenue, which was we had an opportunity to use the court system and have judges waive outstanding legal financial obligations or convert them to community service hours. And so we're continuing to do that as well, one person at a time. It is a very arduous and detailed process, but we're committed. We're committed to making sure that every one of the 1.4 million people who should benefit from Amendment 4 have the opportunity to do so.
Thank you so much for explaining how that worked out. And Jan had her hand raised up. So Jan?
This is a really very, very interesting and kind of hopeful approach. What was your strategy for passing the amendment? Was there a lot of publicity? Grassroots movement? Just exactly what path did it take?
When you said grassroots, I couldn't help but just chuckle a little bit, because I remember there were so many people that was trying to trying to characterize our campaign, and they were like, "Man, you had a great bipartisan campaign," and like, no, it was not bipartisan. All right, and they were, "Oh, I'm sorry, I meant nonpartisan campaign," and I was like, "Nah, we wasn't nonpartisan either." And what I would say was that we were an organic grassroots movement that welcomed and enjoyed bipartisan support. And the difference is we didn't lead with the politics, we led with the people. Right? So that was the primary strategy in our campaign, was that it was about people first. Right? And we kept the campaign elevated around that, and we organized people around love. Like, no matter what part of the state I went to in Florida, I would always ask people one question. You know what that question is? Do you know anyone who you love who ever made a mistake? That's it. That's it. It wasn't about, oh, look at what the Democrats are trying to do, or look what the Republicans are trying to do, or look what the Black people are trying to do, or look what the white people are trying to do. It wasn't any of that. Very simple. Do you know anyone who you love, you care about, who's ever made a mistake? That was it. Just that plain and simple.
All right.
I knew early, I just add this piece, prior to starting the campaign, it dawned on me that, yeah, let's create a moral dilemma in the vote. I do believe blood is thicker than water. And when that person goes in that voting booth, they have to make a decision. Do they vote so that their loved one could have a better way of life? Right? Someone who they have to sit at the dinner table with every night or lay in bed with every night? Do they vote so they can have a better way of life? Or do they listen to a slick sounding politician? And I gambled, and I thought that, you know what, more often than not, blood is going to be thicker than water, and people are going to vote so that someone who they love can have a chance of living a good life.
All right. Thank you, Desmond. Fred has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you for a really interesting talk. I had a sort of the same question that Jan had, but I'd like to ask it in a slightly different way. What I'm really interested in is the mechanics of how you got this message out to people. One of the issues that we have as a society is we feel that in many ways, at least we think in many ways, that there's people that would support a lot of the ideas that we have, and also that the message that we have and we want to say to people is not being heard in the background of a lot of political discussion. How did you get, I mean, I think you have the right, I mean, the message is clear. I think it's the right message. There's no question in my mind. You're a charismatic speaker. You've got emotion. You've got logic. It's all there. It's all, I mean, but how did you get that many people to hear it and to think about it? That's what I don't understand.
not handicapping yourself before you get out the gate.
Yeah.
And so many people do that. So many organizations do that. So many campaigns do that. They limit who can talk to them and who they can talk to before they even start. Right? You would have some folks who say, hey, they would come out with, this is a progressive campaign to blah, 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 blah. Right? So basically now you're saying, oh, I'm only going to talk to progressives. Only progressives can talk to me. You're limiting who you can talk to. Right? And the thing about it is that if you really stop and think, if you really just even stop and think about your neighbor, right? Or just people in general, we have so much, let me tell you, we have so much more in common than we have that divides us, right? But when we come out with these labels, right, for some reason, we're so intent on labeling ourselves and labeling movements and stuff. When we come out with these labels, we further exasperate the divide of this country, right? And we highlight what divides us, and we totally ignore what unites us, right? And I struggle with that sometimes, right? Because, man, isn't it the moments that our heart feels the best are the moments when we're not engaged in this kind of everyday thing, right? I used to always tell people this, right? And this was like our campaign. I told them our campaign was like the aftermath of a hurricane, right? When people came together, regardless of their political leanings or religious leanings or even race. I remember the flooding in Houston, where you had an African-American man in a boat to rescue the white guy, and he stopped the boat to let the white guy go back to his house and get the Confederate flag, right? In spite of the fact of the racist history of that Confederate flag, that black man was able to look beyond that and see the humanity in that white man, right? Let me tell you, the condo collapse, 9/11, catastrophes. We come to each other's aid without thinking about anything. And I always tell a story, matter of fact, I'm gonna use Todd since he's our winner today, right? Todd is driving down 95, right? He's coming down to visit me in Florida, right? He's on 95 South, and Todd runs across, he sees an accident ahead. There's somebody laying on the ground, and Todd decides to stop his car. He stops his car, he gets out, he runs up to that person. Fred, I promise you, Todd's first question to that person is not going to be, did you vote for Donald Trump? It's not going to be how much money you make. It's not going to be what's your sexual identity. It's not going to be what's your immigration status. His first question is going to be along the lines of, are you okay, or how can I help? It's in those moments that we're great as a society, that we're great as a country, right? That we're great as a group of people, because it's those moments that we're at our most natural element, right? To where we don't see the things that divide us, we see the things that unite us, and that's our shared humanity. And it is so strong inside of us that there are times when we would even risk our own lives to save the life of someone we don't even know. But yet, after that moment is done, we will go about our everyday lives with these labels and engaging in rhetoric that continues to further divide us as a people. So deep down inside, our natural inclination is to connect with each other and to care about each other, right? And to respect each other's humanity. That is our natural inclination, because that's what shows up in moments of crisis. We don't think about, should we run in there? Because I don't know if that guy voted for Biden or voted for Trump. We don't think about those things. We're like, man, that's a child of God, or that's a human being that's in peril, and I can do something about it, right? And that's what we do. That's where we connect. And so, in efforts at the end of the day, I mean, how in the heck can we politicize whether or not a child should have clean and safe drinking water? Since when does protecting each other from from a transmittable disease become a political thing? Since when? We politicize air, whether we still have clean air, and use that to divide us, right? And so I believe that what enhances the success of a campaign or effort is to roll out that campaign and the effort in a way that allows any and everyone to feel that they can be a part of that effort, and not have people feel that they're excluded from this. Or you thinking that, oh, I'm not going to go over there and talk to those people. I'm only going to go talk to my people. Then what are you fighting for? Right? When you talking about you're for democracy, and I'm only going to fight so that more Democrats or more Republicans can get registered. No, if you're not fighting for Democrats and Republicans to get registered, then you're not a champion of democracy. And you're further exasperating the partisan tribalism that we're seeing tearing this country apart. It starts with how we're coming out of the gate. It is so important to understand that we have a shared humanity, and that's the platform that we build upon for everything. And we let love, like Jennifer, that was so beautiful what you did about the King Center. But that's where it is. You know, listen, Dr. Martin Luther King said, hate can't drive out hate. Fear can't drive out fear. Darkness can't drive out darkness. But you know what could defeat all of that? Love, right? The love. Like, love commands you to not respond with hatred. That, I think, is the foundation of the nonviolent approach, right? I'm going to respond to your violence towards me with love, not with more violence, because then they'll never stop. The only way I can defeat that violence is by responding with love. And so we have to figure out how we can let love be the driving force, and not just the need or the desire, and sometimes the selfish desire to win something, right? But let love be that guiding force to drive us in a more humanistic approach to solving the issues in our communities. I hope that kind of answered your question.
Desmond, I want to move on to Andrea, who's been waiting. And so Andrea, unmute yourself and ask away.
Hi. So I would like to talk about something that is related to this. I'm not used to talking in front of groups, so I'll try to organize my thoughts as best I can. So I have a friend whose loved one is serving 15 years under the ACCA for 3 prior predicate offenses of common law robberies. So under the ACCA, other offenses that he served time for in the past, he's having to serve time for again. He was convicted of felon in possession of a firearm. Now, this topic relates to how do we treat people who have been convicted in the past, who've already served time for their offenses. So under the ACCA, they're lumping people together. This person had common law robberies, which weren't violent. However, by definition, because they're categorizing the common law robbery as being a violent offense, whether for everyone. So that's why he's serving the 15 years in prison. This also relates to, so he was in possession of a firearm, and there were 2 people who had threatened his life. So this kind of relates to, do felons have a right to own firearms and protect themselves, especially if they're not actually dangerous or likely to be dangerous? I realize, so there's differences. Some felons have actually committed violent acts, but this man, my best friend's loved one, had never threatened anyone with a gun or done anything like that in regard to these common law robberies. One, he was coerced by his mom to just take a plea. A friend had stolen something and put it in his pocket, so he served time for that. Another thing was he took a gift back from his fiance, who they were having an argument, and he had given her a gift, and he later served time for that. Now, a lot of people in anger might have taken something back from a fiance, but never been convicted or had to serve time. Now, so what I'm saying is this is a human being, and part of what he's serving time for are things that other people wouldn't have been convicted of, and I'm having trouble organizing my thoughts.
No, I have your questions already. I already know what your questions are. I'm ready to answer them, or if you're ready for me to answer.
Okay, but so I'm just about ready.
Okay.
My friend is doing her best to advocate for him, and we're always looking for resources. He's trying to find ways, either maybe through compassionate release, or like to get his sentence reduced, or yeah, to get into a better situation. So I'm just I just try to help in whatever way I can, to see if I can find resources, or like with someone like you who's been through so much and seems to know a lot, about the legal system and all this stuff. If you had any suggestions or resources you might be able to send to me. But anyway, so that's really what I have to say.
Well, man, you gave a whole lot of information there. And
I hope it wasn't too much.
You have about 5 questions in there, and I'm going to try to at least
Uh-huh.
answer 2 of them. All right.
Okay.
Well, actually, I'm going to
Yeah.
answer 3 of them. Number
Okay.
one, a real easy one. In North Carolina is an organization called Forward Justice. You should
Forward
do some
Justice.
research. Forward Justice. You can look them up, and you could probably. I would contact them and ask them if there's anything that they can do and give guidance. So I'll let the North Carolina org handle that. They're in Durham, I believe, North Carolina. Okay. So
Okay, thank you
that's
so
the
much.
easy one. But there's 2 other things that you brought up that I think is vitally important, right? And it's how, and this is any veterans on the call? Any veterans? No veterans. Okay. But there's 2 things. All right. The other thing is, when you talk about should people with felony convictions be able to own a firearm, especially if they're nonviolent, right? Let me
Right.
tell you. So here's the whole thing though. But that distinction between violent and nonviolent is a farce. It is a
It's a
farce.
farce.
Right.
Yeah,
Now,
they lump everything together. They lump
no,
yeah.
no, not that way though. I'm just let me get it. Let me get it.
Okay,
It's a
okay.
farce because people want to make a distinction between violent and nonviolent, and they want to, like you implied. Well, maybe a person who committed a nonviolent offense should be able to get a firearm, right? And not the person who committed a violent offense, because they've already shown that they can be violent and they have a propensity to be violent again. So we don't want them people with a firearm, right? But the reality is, right? The reality is that the distinction between violent and non-violent is part of the rhetoric that's used to get away with so many other things, right? And that's why you can get the career criminal like type acts that you're talking about, where once if you commit offense so many a certain period of time after you've already been convicted of another offense, they can enhance and it just exasperate the time that you have to spend in incarceration. But let me
That's
go
right.
back to the root. Let me go back to the root, because it goes back to once again, this humanity thing that we're talking about, right? That I'm hoping that you all would appreciate. There's a book called African Americans and the Atomic Bomb, right? And it's written by Dr. Ntandi. I can't remember his first name. African Americans and the atomic bomb. And what it talks about is the African American community's response to the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? That ended, I think, World War II, right? And in that book, African Americans, of course, was horrified when the United States dropped this bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki and killed so many people, because they were like, man, if the United States could eliminate people like that, what would they do to us who they don't like, right? And so they were very concerned. But in that book, the thing that captured my attention more than anything was the fact of what the United States did prior to bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And that was that they engaged in a massive propaganda campaign against Japanese people, right? They even had caricatures that was grossly exaggerated of Japanese people with extremely slanted eyes, fangs as teeth, right? Claws as fingernails. And it basically created a narrative that said that these monsters were coming to invade our country, and they're going to rape our women and children, and they're going to burn down our villages, right? And they was engaged in this intensive propaganda campaign that did two things and did it real well. Number one, it dehumanized the Japanese people, and it desensitized us as to their humanity, right? And it did such a good job that when the United States dropped the bomb and killed thousands of innocent women and children, rather than there be moral outrage, there was a celebration in the street. We celebrated the murder of innocent women and children solely because of a very successful propaganda campaign that dehumanized people and desensitized us as to their humanity. That is what we see in our criminal justice system, right? That they use words, violent criminal and super predator and this and that as ways to dehumanize those people, right? That are terrorizing our community. And as a result of that, we don't see the dehumanization of them, and we don't see how we further exasperate that, you see? And the only time that it really comes home to us is when it's a loved one that's gotten caught up in the system. You see, we don't want folks to have access to a job, and at least that's what our mindset is saying, when in reality, we're actually going against our own self-interest. It is in our best interest that when a person like me re-entered or released, I committed a crime, I got caught, I served my time. Well, first of all, we got to realize something anyhow, that all of us have committed some type of crime or another. We just didn't get caught, right? And us not getting caught does not make us more better or morally better than the person that did. As a matter of fact, they may have an edge on us because at least they served time for their offense. We got away with it scot-free. All right. And so when we have this person that's coming out, he served his time and he's coming out into society, do we want him to be able to get a job? Do we want him to be able to get an education? Do we want him to be able to buy a home? Do we want him to be able to contribute to the tax base? Do we want him to feel a part of society? It would seem that that's what we want to do, because if he's able to do that, then he's able to successfully reintegrate. However, what comes out of our mouth is we don't want these criminals coddled, and so we have these barriers that are erected. He can't vote, he can't get a job, he can't get a housing, he can't get an education. And what do you think he's going to do? What is the likelihood of him being a repeat offender? And he can go from something that was something as simple as drug use to armed robbery to even murder. Anyone is capable of doing that. Before somebody committed their first crime, they supposedly weren't capable of doing it, but they were. We all are. In the heat of a moment, in the blink of an eye, we can go from God-fearing, law-abiding citizens to someone who is caught up in the criminal justice system, right? And so many of our people who are in the system have a direct connection to the abuse of drugs and alcohol. So many of the people who are caught up in our criminal justice system have a direct connection to, you know what? Poverty. right? But the powers that be would create these narratives to where we're not as empathetic to the individuals, and we actually go against our own self-interest, right, by being hard on these individuals. That's why we were able to pass 3 strike laws and make it, and the career criminal laws, because yeah, we want to get those animals off the street, but they weren't animals. They were somebody's son, somebody's daughter. If your son or your daughter actually got in trouble at school, how would you want them to be treated? Like an animal? Would you like your loved one to be treated like an animal? But that's what we help bring about by knowing, because every politician know that if I don't act tough on crime, you people are not going to elect me. So let me further perpetuate this thing and say, wait, I can't be nice to those violent criminals, because then you guys are going to vote me out of office. I can't act like I'm in favor of criminal justice reform, in spite of the fact that all of the evidence is showing us, no matter how much we incarcerate people, no matter how much we police people, we're no more safe today than we was 10 years ago.
And we're also categorizing them. By using
There
the
you go.
categorical approach, we're acting like if a crime has a certain name, like common law robbery, like they're all the same, you know?
Well,
And they're not.
yeah.
They're all considered violent, but they're not all violence. And
But here's the thing. The thing is that what we do need to understand, right? And I used to share this story when we talked about whether or not people should have the right to vote, right? And that voting is the most telling form of citizenship that one can see, right? And I tell folks that speaks to American citizenship more than anything else, right? Being able to vote. And I tell about my 4 sons. I have 4 sons and a daughter. And anybody with boys, anybody have boys, right? If anyone you all have boys, you know that they're prone to do boneheaded things. It's just part of their DNA. They're going to do something to make you scratch your head or pull your hair out. Say, well, what the heck were you thinking? That's what they do. They were made for that. And I had 4 of them. So they took turns with me, right? Never ending. But you know what I realized? That no matter what my sons do, they never stop being my sons. No matter what mistake or boneheaded thing they do, they never stop being my son. And so I believe that no matter what a person does, he should never stop being an American. In Maine and Vermont, you never lose your right to vote. In so many countries around the world, you never lose your right to vote. You are still a citizen of that country, whether you make a mistake or not. And so therefore, if there's a person that made a mistake and lost the right to vote, he was relegated to second-class citizenship status. So we believe he should get that back. And guess what? Then if he should be able to get that back, he should be able to get his other rights back. He should get all his rights back. I know it's a hard pill to swallow, but that's just reality.
I'd like to wish Andrea good luck with her friend. I would like to move on to other people.
Forward justice. Forward justice.
Okay, right. Thank you so much.
All right. Jennifer, you're next.
Oh, wow. Oh. You may be on mute,
Can you hear me
Jennifer.
now? There we go.
Yeah.
So I just have a question in regards to just any actions, anything that your campaign has done against lobbying. I feel like lobbying is is the root of all evil. But crime is big business. Just to briefly, I used to work in the federal prison system, so I know there are a lot of people who make money off of inmates, prisons, private prisons, all of that. Mm-hmm. So I'm just interested if there's been any movement in that you know of, or any at all.
Well, so I think part of the movement against lobbying, is I think educating of people, of regular constituents, and not about the evils of lobbying, believe it or not, right? But really about our laziness. No, Desmond, what do you mean by that? Well, let me tell you. I don't know if there's any business owners on this call, right? But I've searched far and wide, and maybe you guys can help me out. I don't know of any successful, and the key word here is successful business, in which the boss have to beg an employee to do something. And when the employee don't do it, the employee gets a raise and even a promotion. You guys know any successful business like that? Mhm. You're not going to have a successful business. But guess what? That's what's happening in our politics, right? That we, the people, the bosses, we elect people to serve us, public servants, and we tell them this is what we want, and they ignore us, and we reelect them, right? And we keep on reelecting them, and sometimes we even give them a promotion. We do that every time. My mother told me a long time ago that the tail does not wag the dog. It's the dog that wags the tail, right? Recognizing that just and listen, I'm not a professor, but let me just give you just a general idea that all the power rests within each and every one of you all as an individual, right? This inalienable rights as an entity that was created by some higher force that some of us still struggle to identify. Some of us, we take either way out and say, hey, that's God. It's a higher power. But we have all of the power within ourselves. But what we have done was that we have acquiesced some of our power, right? In order for us to live together in a society, in order for us to live together as a group and afford the safety and protection, and for us to function and thrive, we decided that we're going to give up some of our power so we can live as a group. And what we're going to do with that power that we give up collectively is create, right, a government to take care of our affairs, to take care of the things that we want them to do. And so we elect people to run that government. They're elected people. They're public servants. They're our servants to do our bidding. But what does it say when you have issues in which 90, 80, 90% of the people are saying that we should do a certain thing and politicians can ignore that because of lobbyists? Because these lobbyists give them money, enough money for them to get reelected. So they're not no longer serving the people who elected them, they're serving the people who are paying them. But it's the people who elected them that's allowing that to go on. The lobbyists only have a certain number of votes. It's the people that has the power. But what has happened is that our public servants, we've transformed them into demigods, and we have taken on the role. We have reversed our role from being the boss into being the servant. We have. And unless we understand that and reverse the trend, we can scream all about the lobbyists all we want to, but if we're not showing up at polls and we're not exacting consequences, if we're not giving people pink slips, then we're going to keep getting what we're getting. And we're going to keep going in the direction that we're going. And as hard as it may be to swallow, then that comes from all sides. And that's part of the reason why the powers that be encourage these labels and would push these labels, because it keeps us divided and focused on the things that separate us rather than the things that bring us together. Rather than the things that bring us together. And it would create situations which we both want the same thing, but we're going about it in entirely opposite ways and believing that the other person is against what we want when we actually want the same thing.
Thank you, Desmond. And Dorothy has her hand up now. Dorothy?
Yes, thank you for a really uplifting view of things. Instead of politics of fear, I feel like your talk was a lot about hope, which I really appreciate. I'm going to go off on a different tangent. I think I heard Chris say that you were a MacArthur Fellow. And I'm really curious about that process. How did that happen? Are you nominated? Do you campaign for it? I've always been
You
impressed
can't
with those fellowships.
you can't campaign for it. Matter of fact, I got a little extra bonus for you, Dorothy. Thanks for that question. But yeah, you can't campaign for it. It's a very secretive process. No one knows that they're nominated, and only certain people could do the nominations, and we don't know who those people are. But you know, like in my case, I was driving down the street, coming from Best Buy, heading home, and I got a call, and I think I lost them twice. I might have hung up on them once, thinking it was one of those robocalls. Finally, when I was able to get a hold of them, they identified themselves, and I had to pull over on the side of the road. I was just blown away, and they told me that I had won the MacArthur Genius Fellowship, right? And you know, let me tell you, it was amazing, you know. And one of the things that they tell you is that the they told me that that's the highest like award that a person can get in the United States, right? And they said the only thing that's bigger than that was a Nobel Peace Prize, right? You agree, Jennifer? Jennifer's like, yep. All right, let me tell you. I was like, why me? I didn't understand, you know. And up until recently, I still didn't understand, right? But you know what brought it home for me, Mara? Right? Was actually last February. Guess what happened? My organization did get nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize.
Wow.
Right? Yes. And so we were a 2023 Nobel Peace Prize nominee. And that brought that question up again. Why us? Why me? And I've come to the conclusion that every now and then, like the Time 100 person, one of 100 most influential people, I didn't politic for any of that, right? But I think every now and then the universe has a way of giving you signs that you are in alignment with the universe, right? Because at the core of everything that I did, and it was mainly because of what I went through in 2000, well, in my earlier years, and especially in 2005, when I was at the depths of hell, right? When I was standing in front of those railroad tracks, active crack user, addict, and homeless, and being at the depths of hell and going through treatment and emerging out of that, right, with a newfound, a renewed hope, a renewed spirit, and knowing that I was dedicating my life to giving back no matter what. That was the one thing that made sense in my life, right? That I was fighting and I was praying for each and every one of you, right? You, Maura, and Jan, and Dorothy, and Todd, right? That man, that what drives me is that wanting you all to feel loved and wanting you all to feel respected and dignified. All of that, right, is in alignment with the universe, right? When you look at everything that's created, it gives a little and it takes a little, it takes a little and it gives a little, right? And it's only when we try to get everything just gimme, that death occurs, right? One of the things, as a matter of fact, I got to share this with you all. I hope you all appreciate it. At a Jewish funeral, a rabbi tells this story. So if I get it wrong, blame the rabbi, right? But he tells the story about in the Middle East, there are the two major bodies of water, the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee, right? And the Sea of Galilee is a vibrant body of water, right? And you know, you go fishing there, all kinds of stuff happening at the Sea of Galilee. And the Dead Sea is the exact opposite. It's dead, it's void of life, right? And the rabbi said that both of these bodies of water get their nutrients from the same source. They get their blessings from the same source. And so the question was, how could it be that these two bodies of water that gets their blessing from the same source be so drastically different? One vibrant and full of life, while the other one dead and void of life. And the answer was an easy answer. You see, the Sea of Galilee had tributaries. So whatever blessings it received, whatever nutrients it received, it passed on to other bodies of water. which created the filtration system. But the Dead Sea was self-enclosed, so everything it received, it held on to, right? And I was like, my God, that's so indicative of life, because sometimes you see people that seem to have it all, have all the money, the fame, and all that stuff, but on the inside, they're dead, and they're void of love and life. They're miserable. You hate being around them. And then you have somebody who don't have anything, but they're just a joy to be around. They're a giving person. And so I realized that it's all part of nature, that our blessings really come, right? And we're able to enjoy them even more when we're able to pass it on to other bodies of water. And no matter what station of life we're in, and I realized that when I was coming out of drug treatment, that no matter what station of life I was in, whether title or I had or didn't have, or how much or how little money I made, that there was always someone worse off than me. There was always someone that could benefit from my story, that could benefit from my journey. There was something for me to offer, that I wasn't a nobody anymore. I was somebody if I shared me with the world. And so I think that's part of just the universe, saying that that's how we have to, that's what makes the universe thrive. When there's taking and there's giving and there's that constant flux and filtration, that's when it's vibrant, right? And every now and then these things have to happen. And so I think the universe says, yeah, Desmond, when you get depressed sometimes or you get weary and think, man, why am I doing this? Seems like no one's listening and the country's going down the crapper or whatever, and you want to just walk away. No, don't walk away. You're doing the right thing. And we want to validate you. And that's what happens. Because I'm not better than a whole bunch of folks.
That's inspiring. Mara, you have your hand up.
I will try to be brief because I know that we're running out of time because too many of us are asking you questions, Desmond. First of all, I would like to say I'm awfully glad that no train came, because
me too, and my wife.
all the impact you've had has been phenomenal. But I was thinking about one of my views of the whole prison system. There's two really different views that people have about why you're sending somebody to prison. One view is we got to punish them. But the other view is we want to rehabilitate them. And if you're on the side where you want to rehabilitate somebody, you're looking at their humanity. And more of us ought to be thinking about rehabilitating and acknowledging humanity, because it gives a much better chance for the people who are stuffed in there to actually come out in a vibrant way and have a meaningful life. I mean, you overcame an awful lot of odds, and that's phenomenal. But there are so many people who that's just not going to happen for. And mostly what I just had was a comment.
But you made a great point though, Mara, and I think it's so important. Yeah, those in theory, yeah, those were the two, right? Whether it was retributive or it was restorative, right? Whether we could rehabilitate or we just want to punish people. And sadly, the punishment has won out in this country. And it's more about punishment than anything, right? And we can see that by increasing penalties, and or even increasing what is considered a crime, right? It just keeps growing and growing and growing. And then in places where, okay, yeah, we're going to offer rehabilitative classes, right? And the ironic part about that is that, and I face that too, is that, if I don't get a job skill, right? If I don't have a job skill when I get out, that makes it harder for me. So there's an opportunity for me to get a job skill in prison, but guess what? I could only get that training if I have at least a 15-year sentence, right? Right, because if I have a 3-year sentence or a 2-year sentence, I'm not going to have an opportunity to get that job training. And so there's so many flaws in our system. But yeah, ideally, yeah, we would want to be rehabilitative. And here's another thing. The overwhelming majority of people who are incarcerated don't even have to be incarcerated. And that I could tell you that the majority of crimes that people are convicted of are quality of life crimes, right? And what I do know, as a matter of fact, I'll give you a great example. They did a study in Dade County, a homeless person. A homeless person would commit about 80 crimes a year. A homeless person with substance abuse issue would commit about 115, 130 crimes a year. If you want to fight crime, then you get somebody safe and affordable housing. That's how you fight crime, right? Or you give someone substance abuse treatment, not incarceration. We even incarcerate our people with mental issues. We don't send them to a mental hospital. We send them to a prison, right? I like sending somebody that have tuberculosis to prison when instead of sending them to the emergency room. No, you send them to a hospital and get them treatment. And that, I'm telling you, is about at least about 75% of the people who are incarcerated. Now, I will tell you this. When I was incarcerated, there was a very handful of people who I was around that made me shudder and say, God, I hope they never get out, right? And those are the people that had what they call a depraved mind, right? There are not many of those. Believe it or not, there are not many of those, right? But we have to figure out how do we address that. But we can't like throw out the child with the bathwater, you know? We've got to figure out how do we dial back on our infatuation with incarceration. And there's so many countries around the world that have demonstrated successful ways of doing that.
So true. So true.
Thank you.
I truly hope we can rethink all of that, despite the fact that it looks like the trend is not going there. Certainly Desmond has given us some reason to hope. But I hear myself echoing. I'm not sure why that's happening, but my apologies. I'd like to thank Desmond for his talk today and his question and answer period. It's been inspiring. So thank you so much. Now I will continue with our program. I did not spend any time talking about our collection because we can't pass the basket. So thank you all who support us with your pledges and your giving money in the basket when we meet in person. Thank you all so much for that. And now announcements. Mara, do you have announcements?
We have an in-person program next week.
Just lost. Oh, there she is. She somehow or another made herself muted.
Yeah, my computer is being strange. We have an in-person program next week. And hybrid. So people who are not able to come in person can still tune in via Zoom. But we're going to have a speaker who's going to be talking about, I just went blank on the word. Banned books and.
Oh, yes. There's a woman who's a librarian I think at the University of Greensboro, who's going to speak to us about book banning and about censorship.
That was the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
It should be a really, really good program. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I hope that people can join us. And
next week after that, we will have our discussion about the book Martin Luther King Jr. A Life. We have read that book, all 800 pages of it. And so I'm looking forward to discussing that with everybody. That'll be at 3:30 after our program. Fred?
Yeah, just briefly, we have a board meeting today at 3:30 on this Zoom channel. Any or all people who are interested in attending certainly can. And our meetings are open. And so board members should be there at 3:30 p.m.
All right. Any other announcements? I don't see any, so I think it's about time to turn the program over to Jennifer for closing words.
All right. So closing words. Again, I'm going to put in a plug for the Legacy Museum. I'm sorry if I did not say that. That's what the museum is called in Montgomery, Alabama. And I'll put some links in the chat here. But they have a segment called On This Day Today. So I'm just going to read that as our closing words. So on January 14th, 1963, after being overwhelmingly elected by white Alabama voters, George Wallace, the infamous segregationist and white supremacist, delivered his inaugural address as governor of Alabama, called for segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever. Throughout his speech, he condemned integration and criticized federal intervention in state affairs. Running for office almost a decade after the Brown versus Board of Education decision, Governor Wallace's 1962 campaign used the slogan, "Stand Up for Alabama," and he vowed to fight integration at the University of Alabama. 6 months later, George Wallace launched himself into the national spotlight by physically blocking 2 Black students, Vivian Malone and James Hood, from enrolling at the University of Alabama. The dramatic stand in the school door was broadcast on national television. And within a week, Wallace received over 100,000 telegrams from white people commending his actions. The political legacy of 4-time Alabama governor and 4-time presidential candidate George Wallace is enduring and increasingly relevant today. Governor Wallace developed a political identity that combined racial demagoguery and fiery rhetoric to defend segregation under the veneer of states' rights. By appealing to racial sentiments, Wallace gained the support of voters who felt threatened by increasing Black political power. During the 1968 presidential election campaign, a year fraught with racial injustice after, among other things, the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Governor Wallace ran as an independent candidate on the back of his racially charged message. At a campaign stop where he asked about the year's protests against racial injustice, Governor Wallace said, and I quote, "We don't have riots in Alabama. They start a riot down there. First one of them to pick up a brick gets a bullet in the brain. That's all. And then you walk over to the next one and say, all right, pick up a brick. We just want to see you pick up one of them bricks now," end quote. Governor Wallace was overwhelmingly popular with Southern whites and became the most successful and popular independent candidate in modern presidential election history. He received almost 10 million votes during the general election and winning the electoral votes of 5 states: Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Louisiana, and Mississippi. Today, a portion of Interstate 10 in Alabama and community colleges in the cities of Dothan and Eufaula, hope I pronounced those right, bear George Wallace's name. He remains one of the most infamous, influential segregationist leaders of his era. Segregationists like George Wallace, operating at the highest levels of government, represented and advanced the views of the majority of white citizens at the time. Please read the Equal Justice Initiative's report for any more details. So, and I'll put that in the chat. Thanks, everyone.
Goodness. Thank you, Jennifer.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that at the risk of sounding political, I guess it doesn't surprise me that certain political candidates today have so much support given the history that you just cited. So thank you so much for that. So now I'd like to thank again Desmond Meade for his excellent talk today, and to Jennifer for opening and closing words, and for Mara for helping me with the Zoom session. So this program was recorded, even though I got off to a late start, and will be available on our YouTube channel later. So thanks to all again, and look forward to seeing most of you next week at our regularly scheduled time at Extraordinary Ventures. Goodbye, folks.